Remakes and remasters. Some are blatant cash grabs. Others are genuine love letters to the fans. The ultimate way to pay homage and respect to the masterpieces that not only captured our childhoods, but in some cases define entire gaming genres, pushing the limits of the hardware for the time, and expanding our definitions and understanding of what a video game is and how it can, and ultimately is now seen as one of the best pieces of art. It seems like whether if it is true or not, we're getting more remakes or remasters as much or as little more than we're really getting newer experiences. And given people's desire to experience newer, more exciting things, experiences that will excite and intrigue us in different ways like never before, remakes and remasters are already fighting a bit of an uphill battle. Throw on top examples like the Grand Theft Auto Definitive Trilogy that was a downright lazy-ass remaster of 3 games that set the entire standard for what open world games should be and how much life a video game can produce given the expansive world each of those games sport. And then on the other side of the coin, you have remasters like The Last of Us Part 1, a game that can be debatable on whether the price tag for a decade-old game is worthy of the changes that were made. There's a deep discussion that's meant to be had on remakes and remasters, whether if enough time has passed for a remaster to be considered, or if a certain game needs to be retold with specific tweaks that help develop a storyline that need to make more sense while simultaneously bringing in newcomers to the series or franchise, trying the absolute best to rekindle the hype and excitement and really overall impact the original hand on fans and the gaming world as a whole. On the flip side of the coin, while taking newcomers into consideration, developing modern gameplay mechanics and even maybe some features, cinematics, animations, new storytelling techniques that help the game feel more like a modern title, not something from years ago with some updated graphics and a bit more polish here and there. You also have to consider the longtime fans, the cult-like following that the original cultivated. The base fans that, truth be told, probably isn't the real demographic these games are targeting. It's two different kinds of people with potentially two different reasons as to why they may possibly invest in the reimagined title, whatever that is. Then you have to find a way to justify to at the very least the majority of those two types of people as to why they want to reinvest in the reimagined version and not just go back to the original they probably have in their libraries for God knows how long. With that latter point possibly being more difficult than most tend to want to admit, the easy alternative is just to remove the older version from storefronts to force people's hands into buying the new one. I mean, you gotta break even and justify a profit somehow after all, and how much easier can it be than by simply removing the older experience? Sometimes the ideas of a recreated story are immediately accepted due to the long period of time that has gone by, and possibly the games in question may not have aged as gracefully as we like them to. Whether that's graphics, gameplay mechanics, maybe there's a mission or bug that's never been tweaked or addressed and it's just outright unrealistic to beat now, or just a pain in the ass by today's standards for one reason or another. There's elements that are truly outdated by today's standards. Games like the Grand Theft Auto Trilogy were immediately welcomed based off the time that's passed, along with what was considered to be Rockstar having a blemish-free reputation. Besides, how can these games be fucked up, especially given the talented work these modders are putting into the originals to give real possible experience as to what a remade version of these games can look and truly feel like. Stuff they're doing 100% absolutely free. Well, some of them are funded, but most aren't. Seems like with the modern technology at everyone's fingertips, while making a video game or modding something to look and feel like a remaster by a AAA team is no small feat. If they could do it with just the basic tools at their disposal and the willpower and pure love they have for these titles, the sky's the limit for the ones that actually have the source code, infinite resources, and trademark rights to do whatever they want with these games. It was a mixture of time, nostalgia, actually seeing these creative things that these modders are putting together, and then Rockstar's blemish-free reputation that everything seemed like the perfect reputation to get the perfect experience of some of the best open world experiences from an older time period. And well, we know how that pile of shit went down. And we have titles like The Last of Us, where many argue not enough time has passed, with the idea being instantly shut down and scoffed at. It still looks and plays incredibly well. Why waste time and resources on something that doesn't really need it? Truth be told, as it turned out, the remaster was great, adding some quality of life improvements, smoother animations and transitions, higher frame rates, small tweaks, and other alterations to fit more with The Last of Us Part 2 story. The only real topic that was up for debate, which I still think is justified after this great remaster, was the insane price jump. $70? Maybe for those that have never played it, but if you had the remaster for the PlayStation 4 or even the original PlayStation 3 version, that price should have been halved for those people. But that's a small compromise that still probably wouldn't satisfy either side of the argument, and that's an argument for a completely different video. But then we have Dead Space, A game that was kind of in the same boat as The Last of Us, with many claiming the original has aged well. No remake or remaster of any kind was needed. Dead Space is obviously vastly different in its situation than The Last of Us, since Dead Space was out in 2008 and had no remaster like The Last of Us did on the PlayStation 4, which in contrast also came out 2013, a whole 3 years later, pushing PlayStation 3 hardware to its limits, giving The Last of Us, a big benefit of seeing additional years of that console and how far that hardware can go, versus Dead Space being a little bit more towards the beginning of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, and them having to experiment a little bit more. But on the topic of Dead Space, we also can't forget the other points of discussion. The original Dead Space is really only accessible for a handful of people. If you're a PC player, that's no issue. The PC port still runs really well, and obviously it's within reach. However, if you're a console player, your options are a bit more limited, with the most valuable being playing it on a more modern Xbox console via backwards compatibility. Maybe on PlayStation it could be accessible through PlayStation's PlayStation Now streaming service, but seeing how I'm not a huge Xbox player, and I'm gonna be honest, I absolutely hate the idea of PlayStation Now, I haven't really tried these options. I'm just going based off of what my experience has been in the past with trying to replay older titles on newer hardware. And obviously this doesn't apply to you if you're an extremely lucky person and have held on to the older consoles and the original disc, in which case obviously you're an exception to the rule, but these are the main options people have to work with. Then outside of this accessibility, there's the other points, like the fear of the remake butchering the story and experience, resulting in a title that was meant to pay homage and respect to the legacy of the title not doing that at all. People to a degree are going to be upset at things that are left out, major story or gameplay elements that were altered, for better or for worse. Perhaps in some cases it was part of the original game's charm. The alteration or complete omission of it is going to be some type of blow, especially if that's an element you're actively or specifically looking forward to. How can something that was this incredible and memorable 5 or so years ago going to look now? With these updated graphics, storytelling, and cinematics, how will it play into the new gameplay additions, if there is any? Naturally, you're going to want to have those comparisons be done. And speaking of the charm, that's another important part of older titles. There's a certain charm to them that will never be recreated. The graphics, less than stellar or crystal clear audio that we're completely spoiled with now. No matter if we get a game that we can all praise and say this is exactly what I remember it being like back when I was a kid, these modern graphics is exactly how I remember this game looking like 5+ years ago, or back when I first experienced it on the original PlayStation. To me, those are things that echo the time period we were in, and that can never be recaptured. The era of hardware and the look and feel of these games have a charm to it that, as much as we try to replicate it with games that have intentional retro looking graphics, it still will never hit the same. The original Max Payne or even older, harder games to find like Manhunt will never be replaced in my heart, because just the way these games look and feel capture that time period they were developed in. The sounds and techniques these older games had to come up with in order to compensate for hardware limitations or even budget constraints, and more often than not, probably both. In some ways, this added creativity added to the passion these games seem to have, and they were just oozing with it. The love and care put into them, while sure not as visually impressive or orgasmically clear as what we get now, it's just a different feeling. A unique sense of love that for me seemed to be missing from modern titles. That could honestly be a small biased opinion of mine, but that's just something that I feel when comparing, originals to remakes, remasters, or even games we get now versus games we got back then. It may look like I'm getting off topic, but these are important points to talk about and touch on, because I believe these are, if not the main ones, some of the most common themes touched on when the discourse of remakes and remasters are brought up. As a consequence of there being no real guidelines or descriptions of what dictates a remake or a remaster, the lines of which and how we judge the quality of which are constantly shifting, with a final decision being based off something a bit more arbitrary, going from person to person. You gotta judge a game from two different sides. The long-term cult-like fans that helped get this series established and globally recognized. How will this game be received by them? What were the changes? Is it enough to buy into it? Should you wait for a sale? Is there anything changed or left out that will cause any type of desire that it wasn't worth the money? Is that desire strong enough to then turn you away from the new experience? That point obviously being a little bit more dependent on the person, but it's still worth bringing up. Alternatively, how will this be for someone that's completely foreign to this game or series? As I just mentioned, It's still an older title to its core with some quality of life improvements, making it some type of hybrid between the old and the new, with it not really being extremely one way or the other. Rather a mix of the two that'll ideally harmonize in a way that'll satisfy both target audiences, the new and the longtime fans. Whether if that is actually the case or just how it seems, I guess can also be debatable, but with The Last of Us Part 1, and even more importantly as it is the reason as to why remakes or remasters are being the topic of discussion again, the Dead Space remake. There's one thing that rings true, and this may very well be the case for the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, although I can't say for certain as I'm not a huge fan of those types of games and therefore haven't spent enough time with them to really say, but with the other two, at least one thing is certain, that is they are still older titles. They, for lack of a better description, still feel like an older game, for one reason or another. The Last of Us Part 1, for example, lacked a few mobility options The Last of Us Part 2 had, like Ellie's ability to go prone or lay on her back in the middle of a gunfight, animations and capabilities that weren't in the original Last of Us and were omitted in the Part 1 remake, making it feel more in line to some degree to the original. Sure, there were many changes, but gameplay missions like this can still in some cases provide enough of an impact to the game to make it feel older or more authentic to its roots. Dead Space Remake, on the other hand, uses some original sounds, like the sound effect when you pick things up, which is small, but the sound is iconic, and just the feel of the entire game feels a little older, with a mode of managing to capture the look and feel of the original while adding in some previously mentioned changes to make it feel more modern or even more in line with Dead Space 2. Changing up how Isaac fires his weapons, from him originally purchasing these items to straight up rewarding players that are actively exploring by them naturally acquiring the new weapons in the environment. They added an actual voice for Isaac, whereas in the original he had no voice. He basically just sat there and listened to everything that he was being told to do. They added in inventory space so it isn't as harsh on players that don't manage things like that very well. Adding Dead Space 2's kinesis ability so you can pick up objects and throw them. Actually seeing the flesh being ripped off the necromorphs, drastically improving on the game's original dismemberment mechanic, giving immediate visual feedback of what their health is at and how much damage you're doing, or replacing the game's power nodes with power switching, reducing the need of focusing more on, again, the inventory management, as previously grabbing a power node to open up a door would take up inventory space. There's also some mobility in Zero-G that wasn't there in the original. Universally speaking, the Dead Space remake is being called a fantastic experience, with some going so far as to say it's going to be their Game of the Year choice. A massive congratulations to Motive is well deserved, and a collective sigh of relief can be felt from everyone worried it was going to be butchered in some way, shape, or form, due to either EA's growing sense of greed and overwhelming need to make changes to fit more in line with their modern financial strategy. I wouldn't have been surprised if every suit upgrade or branch of upgrades to the weapons actually required real-life money, or hell, if every limb you shot off a necromorph, the game paused and required you to fork over another small amount of cash to actually acquire the full experience of the game's core mechanics. Or even expecting Motive to take the initiative to implement some type of creative changes that fit in line with whatever they're trying to accomplish, whether that be some type of personal stamp of their development team on the game that impacted the overall experience, or severely altering a plotline to make the game feel less authentic to the original and actually be Motive's own quote-unquote Dead Space experience of sorts. But it seems like most are ultimately happy with what Motive delivered. As a fan of the original and as someone who personally enjoyed what the remake had to offer, there's plenty publishers and developers can take from this game and its accomplishments moving forward. Truth be told, I'm not even talking exclusively from a remake or a remaster perspective. Just from replayability alone, this game did many things that correctly encourage multiple playthroughs, like having your CE suit gradually get increased access levels, giving you the security level clearance requiring to open up some doors, lockers, and chests, something that encourages backtracking to go and search for a particular door you couldn't open earlier in the game. However, since hours later your security level has been increased, why not go back and look for that particular door to acquire even more upgrades or supplies? This also works out fantastically well from a multiple playthrough perspective, as since day one, a New Game Plus option was immediately available. This is something even newer games don't release with. God of War Ragnarok released on November 9th, 2022, and as of now, 3 months later, in February of 2023, it's still not out yet. Don't get me wrong, two completely different games. I know, the New Game Plus has already been announced for Ragnarok, and I'm sure there's much more balancing, tweaking, and alterations Ragnarok's New Game Plus is going to require in order to function properly. I'm not being ignorant, naive, or even ungrateful. Shit, I'm not even making this a direct one-to-one comparison. Ragnarok's not the only game to release without a New Game Plus, or having the New Game Plus releasing months later. Plenty of games have and continue to release like this. I'm just saying, it's nice to not have to wait months after a game's release to wait for a New Game Plus, or to give more reasons to immediately delve back into the experience. Having the backtracking of the CE suit, security security level and a new game plus on top of it just instantly boosts everything in this remake's favor for replayability and getting completely sucked into this game's world. It's just a huge bonus that I'd love to see more games released with. That's basically all I'm saying. Doubly so if you can intertwine the two like Competitve did here. All in all, the Dead Space remake is a fantastic one that I highly recommend. I would just love to see if there are going to be any new remakes or remasters going forward, which there are, as I don't see the trend dying down anytime soon. I'd like to see some general consensus and baseline agreements on what dictates a great remake and how we can differentiate the two between a remake and remaster. Let me know what you guys think. Have you guys played the Dead Space remake? What was your favorite thing about it? Do you love how Competitve went about it? Do you think they messed up or could have done better here or there? Let's talk down in the comments section. But like always, guys, my name is Cynic. Thank you all so much for watching, as I greatly appreciate it. And until next time, I will see you all later.